All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into 1 Corinthians 9.127.
Okay.
This is a passage you flagged as particularly interesting,
Uh-huh.
and think of us kind of like your guides.
Okay.
We're going through your notes,
Yeah.
your study materials, and we're just going to unpack all the
Yeah.
fascinating bits from this passage.
Great.
So let's jump right into it. What do you think is one of the most fascinating parts about this section?
Well, what's fascinating to me is how Paul starts off, in this section, just kind of boldly asserting his authority as an apostle.
Right.
He's reminding the Corinthians, hey, I've seen Jesus. You guys are living proof of my work.
Right.
But then he does something completely unexpected.
He does. He pulls a total 180.
Yeah.
He chooses not to exercise his right to financial support from the church,
Oh.
even though it was totally normal for apostles.
Right.
It's almost like he's throwing down a gauntlet and saying, I could do this,
Right.
but I'm not going to.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, why bring it up in the first place then?
It's a brilliant move, I think. I think that by highlighting his rights and then choosing not to use them, he really emphasizes just the purity of his motives.
Uh-huh.
He's not in it for the money,
Right.
or the perks that might come along with it.
Mm-hmm.
He's serving out of, this deep, unwavering commitment to spreading the gospel.
You got to admit, though, that's a pretty bold statement to make.
Yeah.
Could you imagine back then some of the whispers going around?
Yeah.
Like, what's Paul's angle?
Yeah.
Is this a guilt trip?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And he anticipates that.
Yeah.
He addresses that head on in verse 15, where he says, I'd rather die, basically, than have my glorying be made void.
That's right. That's right.
And that word glorying is really key, I think, because it's not about, bragging or self-promotion. It's about his unwavering commitment to serving without any strings attached, so the message itself can shine through.
So it's making sure that there's nothing blocking the purity of that message.
Exactly. Yeah.
So by refusing financial support, he's basically amplifying the message itself.
Yeah. I think of it like this.
Okay.
If someone's constantly pushing a product on you,
Yeah.
right? And they keep emphasizing how much they'll benefit from the sale.
Right.
You're kind of like, well, hold on a second. What's your angle?
Yeah.
But if they genuinely believe in that product and they're willing to share it, even at a personal cost, then you're much more likely to trust them.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So he's basically saying, look, I believe in this message so much that I'm willing to give up, all this comfort, all this security,
Yeah.
just to share it with you. And it's a pretty powerful testament to his conviction.
It is. And that's even more intriguing when you think about the context.
Mm-hmm.
Paul was living in a world where patronage and reciprocity were deeply ingrained. Financial support for teachers, for leaders was just expected.
It was the norm.
It was the norm. So by rejecting that, system, he was making this radical statement about his ministry.
Right. And, one of the things that you highlighted in your notes was it wasn't just about the money. It was also how incredibly flexible he was and how willing he was to adapt to reach different groups of people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And he even talks about this idea of becoming all things to all men.
Mm-hmm.
So what did he mean by that?
Well, this is where, I think Paul's strategic brilliance really shines.
Okay.
He recognized that to share the gospel effectively, he needed to meet people where they were, culturally, religiously. He wasn't about imposing, just this rigid one-size-fits-all approach.
So the question is, did he ever compromise the core message of the gospel in order to fit in with different groups?
No, not at all.
Okay.
He was adamant about the core truths.
Uh-huh.
What he adapted was his approach, his method of communication.
Okay.
He was sensitive to the cultural nuances. He's willing to adjust his style, but he never compromised the substance of the message.
Okay, so do we have any specific examples of how he put this into practice?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the text highlights how he interacted with different groups. He talks about becoming like a Jew to the Jews. He even lived, under the law to connect with those who followed the Mosaic law.
Mm-hmm.
But with Gentiles who weren't bound by Jewish customs, he became as without law, meaning that he didn't, force those practices on them.
So this is where it gets really interesting to me.
Yeah.
So how can we, in our modern world, which is so incredibly diverse, how can we apply this idea of becoming all things to all men? I mean, it feels super relevant to so many conversations happening today.
Well, I think Paul's example really provides a framework for engaging in meaningful dialogue across differences.
Okay.
It's not about erasing our own identities or beliefs. It's about being respectful,
Mm.
finding common ground, building bridges of understanding.
So it's less about changing who we are,
Mm-hmm.
and it's more about being thoughtful in how we communicate,
Exactly.
how we connect with other people.
Yeah, think about it like this.
Okay.
If you're trying to, explain a complex scientific concept to a child, you wouldn't use the same technical jargon that you would, with a fellow scientist.
Right.
You would adapt your language,
Right.
You'd find relatable examples. You'd, try to make it fun and engaging.
Exactly. It's about meeting people where they are,
Yeah.
intellectually, culturally, whatever it might be.
Precisely. Paul understood the importance of tailoring his message to his audience.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't shy away from engaging with different cultures and perspectives.
Right.
He saw those interactions as opportunities to build relationships and create a space for genuine understanding.
And it's inspiring, He wasn't afraid to step outside of his comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo.
Right.
And he did all of this just for the sake of spreading this message that he really, truly believed in.
Yeah, and it wasn't always easy, right? Remember those athletic analogies he uses? He compares the Christian life to a race, to a boxing match.
Mm-hmm.
And those weren't just motivational pep talks.
Right.
They reflected, the intense dedication, the discipline that was required to live out his calling.
And speaking of those athletic analogies, you had mentioned the Isthmian Games in your notes.
Oh, yeah.
So could you tell our listener a little bit more about those? Because I have a feeling they might be curious, too.
Yeah, the Isthmian Games were huge in ancient Greece.
Uh-huh.
They were held New Corinth every 2 years.
Okay.
And they were, second only to the Olympics in terms of prestige.
Wow.
So everyone in that region would have been familiar with, the intense training, the sacrifices,
Right.
the single-minded focus that was required to compete in those games.
So Paul was using imagery that would have resonated deeply
Oh, yeah.
with his audience.
Absolutely.
So he was making this direct parallel
Mm-hmm.
between the dedication of an athlete
Yeah.
and the dedication that was required to be a Christian.
Exactly, yeah. He was saying, look, if athletes are willing to endure hardship and push themselves to the limit for, this temporary crown, shouldn't we be even more committed to pursuing an eternal reward?
But he goes even beyond that.
He does.
He expresses this concern
Yeah.
that even he, an apostle chosen by God,
Yeah.
could be disqualified
Mm-hmm.
from salvation if he doesn't stay focused, if he doesn't stay true to his calling.
Right.
I mean, that's a pretty intense statement coming from somebody
It is, yeah.
who had such a profound encounter with Christ.
Right. It's a reminder that our faith journey isn't just a destination.
Mhm.
It's this ongoing process
Right.
of growth
Right.
and transformation
Uh-huh.
and, yes, even struggle.
Yeah. And even Paul, with all of his spiritual experiences
Yeah.
and all of his authority,
Mhm.
he recognized that, he was vulnerable to temptation
Yeah.
and the need to stay vigilant,
Right. He's not presenting a message of fear or condemnation,
Okay.
but it's a call to intentionality
Okay.
and mindfulness.
Yeah.
It's like a seasoned captain who knows, the treacherous waters all too well, and so he keeps a constant watch,
Mm-hmm.
even when the seas seem calm.
So how do we practically apply this concept of keeping our bodies under subjection, as Paul says? What does that actually look like in our day-to-day lives?
Well, and that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Because Paul's use of the word bodies here goes beyond just physical discipline.
Right.
He's talking about our entire being,
Yep.
our thoughts, our desires, our actions, even our reactions to things.
Yeah. So it's about bringing every aspect of ourselves into alignment with our faith, our commitment to Christ.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that we have a choice in how we respond to challenges, temptations, even our own internal struggles.
Right.
We can either let those things control us or we can choose to control them.
Right. And that sounds like a constant battle, though.
It is.
Is it even possible to fully achieve that kind of mastery over ourselves?
Well, I don't think Paul's suggesting that we become, emotionless robots,
Right.
or that we'll ever reach a point where we're completely free from internal conflict.
Okay.
It's about the ongoing practice of aligning ourselves with God's will,
Right.
recognizing our weaknesses, and seeking his grace to overcome them.
So it's a journey,
It is, yeah.
not a destination.
Exactly.
And like any journey, there's going to be bumps along the way.
Right.
But the key is to keep moving forward, to keep striving towards that goal
Yeah.
of wholeness and alignment with Christ.
Absolutely.
As we're talking about this, I keep thinking about all the distractions,
Right.
all the temptations we have in our modern world.
Yeah.
And it seems like it would be even harder to stay focused, to stay disciplined today than it was back in Paul's time.
You've raised a really important point. I mean, we're bombarded with messages that tell us, to indulge our desires, to seek instant gratification, to prioritize our own happiness above all else.
It's a constant battle for our attention.
It is, yeah.
And for our hearts,
It is, but that's why I think Paul's message is so relevant today.
Right.
He's not offering, a quick fix or a set of rules to follow. He's inviting us into a way of life, a way of being in the world that requires intentionality, discipline, and a deep trust in God's grace to sustain us.
It's about making choices that align with our values, even when those choices are really difficult, even when they're inconvenient.
Exactly. Yeah. It's about recognizing that true freedom isn't found in just indulging every whim or chasing after every fleeting pleasure,
Right.
It's found in surrendering to God's will and finding our identity and purpose in him.
That's such a powerful message. And it's so needed in our culture today.
It is.
We're surrounded by all these messages telling us to look out for number one.
Right.
Prioritize our own happiness and success above all else. But Paul's example, it reminds us there's a different path.
Yeah.
A path that leads to true fulfillment and lasting joy.
It's a path that's not always easy.
Right.
But it's a path that's worth taking.
Yeah.
It's a path that leads to freedom, to purpose, to a life that's truly meaningful.
Yeah, and it all starts with a simple choice, a choice to surrender our own ambitions, our own desires, to embrace humility and compassion, and to really try to live each day with the intention of making a difference in the lives of the people around us.
Absolutely.
Welcome back. We're jumping right back into 1 Corinthians 9, where Paul really lays out his radical approach to ministry. And so far we've uncovered how he strategically chose to surrender his rights and adapt his methods, to reach all these different groups. He wasn't afraid to challenge the norms at all, and all while emphasizing this need for disciplined living, self-control.
It's, almost paradoxical, isn't it?
It is.
By giving up power and prestige, he actually strengthens his message and his influence.
It's like the opposite of how we think.
Exactly.
The world normally works,
Yeah, it's a real countercultural move, I think.
It is, yeah. And it kind of makes you wonder, how often do we get so caught up in, our own comfort or the need to be right and maybe miss opportunities to truly connect with other people. Paul's example really challenges our modern day perspectives, doesn't it?
Oh, it certainly does. Yeah. I mean, his willingness to set aside personal preferences,
right,
to embrace discomfort for a greater purpose. It's a powerful lesson for us,
It is. And before we go deeper into that, I wanted to kind of circle back to what you were saying about how Paul used these vivid athletic analogies to drive home his points.
Yeah.
And it's with him, it's not just abstract ideas.
Right.
He paints these pictures
that
people can really grasp. And it's just brilliant, especially when you consider, like you said, the Corinthians' familiarity with, the Isthmian Games.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Just imagine those crowds cheering, the athletes pushing themselves to the limit,
Yeah.
It's that intensity of the competition.
Yeah.
And he's taking all of that shared cultural experience and using it to make a spiritual point. And you had mentioned in your notes that these games were a really, really big deal back then.
Yeah, no, huge, yeah.
What kind of impact would those images have had on the people listening to Paul?
Oh, it would have been huge, yeah. The Isthmian Games weren't just a sporting event. It was like this cultural phenomenon.
Okay.
Victors were celebrated as heroes, and the entire community would rally around them.
Right.
So by comparing like the Christian life to a race or to a boxing match, he was elevating the stakes.
Right.
And he was calling for that same level of commitment, like that same level of dedication.
So it's not just a pep talk.
No.
About trying your best.
No, not at all.
It's about like really connecting this, this discipline.
Yeah.
This perseverance of an athlete.
Yeah.
To the discipline and perseverance of living out the Christian faith.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, he understood the power of relatable imagery,
Yeah.
of connecting those like abstract spiritual truths to tangible everyday experiences.
Right.
So he was saying, look, you get what it takes to win in the arena.
Right.
Right. Now apply that same dedication to your spiritual life.
And he didn't stop there, though.
He didn't.
He goes on to express this concern.
Yeah.
That even he, an apostle chosen by God, could be disqualified from salvation if he doesn't stay focused, if he doesn't stay true to his calling. And that's a pretty powerful statement.
It is.
Especially coming from somebody who had such a, profound encounter with Christ.
Yeah, it's a reminder that our faith journey isn't just a destination, right? It's this ongoing process. It requires constant effort, self-reflection, and a willingness to course correct when we stray.
Right. And I think that's such a crucial point.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we fall into this trap of thinking, okay, well, once I've reached a certain level of spiritual maturity, once I've been walking with God for, however many years, I'm somehow immune to failure.
Right.
I'm immune to backsliding.
Yeah.
But Paul's example shows us that even the most seasoned travelers on the spiritual path, they need to stay humble,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they need to stay alert.
Yeah. He's not, presenting a message of fear.
Okay.
Or condemnation, but it's a call to intentionality. It's a call to mindfulness, like a seasoned captain who knows the treacherous waters all too well and keeps a constant watch.
Right. Even when the seas seem calm.
Even when the seas seem calm.
Exactly. Yeah. So the question is, how do we practically apply this concept of, keeping our bodies under subjection, as Paul puts it? What does that actually look like in our everyday lives?
Well, and that's where things get really interesting, because Paul's use of the word bodies here, it goes beyond just like physical discipline. He's talking about like our entire being, our thoughts, desires, actions, even our reactions. So it's about bringing every aspect of ourselves into alignment with our faith and commitment to Christ.
So it's more about like a holistic thing.
It is, yeah. It's about recognizing that we have a choice in how we respond to challenges, temptations, even our own internal struggles.
Right.
We can either let those things control us, or we can choose to control them. Right.
And that sounds like a constant battle.
It is, yeah.
Is it even possible to fully achieve that kind of mastery over ourselves?
Well, I don't think Paul is suggesting that we, become emotionless robots, or that we'll ever reach a point where we're completely free from, internal conflict. It's about the ongoing practice.
Right.
Of aligning ourselves with God's will, recognizing our weaknesses, and seeking his grace to overcome them.
So it's a journey, not a destination.
It is, yeah. Exactly.
And like any journey, there's going to be bumps along the way, but the key is to keep moving forward.
Yeah.
To keep striving towards that goal.
Right.
Of wholeness and alignment with Christ.
Absolutely.
And, as we were talking about this, I keep thinking about all the distractions, all the temptations we have in our modern world. And it seems like it would be even harder to stay focused, to stay disciplined today than it was back in Paul's time.
Yeah, you've raised a really important point. I mean, we're bombarded, right? With messages that tell us to indulge our desires, to seek instant gratification, to prioritize our own happiness above all else.
Yeah, yeah. It's a constant battle for our attention.
It is.
And for our hearts.
Yeah, but that's why I think Paul's message is so relevant today.
Right.
Because, he's not offering a quick fix or a set of rules to follow. He's inviting us into a way of life, a way of being in the world that requires, intentionality, discipline.
And a deep trust in God's grace to sustain us.
So it's about making choices.
Yeah.
that align with our values, even when those choices are really difficult or even inconvenient.
Exactly, yeah. It's about recognizing that true freedom isn't found in just indulging every whim or chasing after every fleeting pleasure, you know? It's found in surrendering to God's will, in finding our identity and purpose in him.
And that's such a powerful message.
It is.
And it's so needed in our culture today. I mean, we're surrounded by all these messages, telling us to look out for, number one, prioritize our own happiness, our own success above all else.
Right.
But Paul's example reminds us that there's a different path.
There is,
A path that leads to, true fulfillment, lasting joy.
It's a path that's not always easy.
Right.
But it's a path that's worth taking.
It is, yeah.
It's a path that leads to freedom, to purpose, to a life that's truly meaningful and impactful.
And it all starts with this simple choice, a choice to surrender, our own ambitions, our own desires, to embrace humility and compassion, and to really try to live each day with the intention of making a difference in the lives of the people around us.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it really boils down to, like, what are we living for?
Yeah.
What drives us? What are we passionate about? What are we willing to sacrifice for? Those are some pretty big questions.
Yeah, they are.
But they're worth wrestling with.
They are. And Paul's example, it challenges us, I think. It challenges us to examine our own hearts, our own motivations. Are we living for something bigger than ourselves?
Right.
Are we willing to step outside of our comfort zones?
Yeah.
And make sacrifices for the sake of others?
Absolutely, yeah. And those are questions that resonate deeply, I think, especially in our current world, which can feel so self-centered, so divided.
It can, yeah.
Paul's message, it's a powerful reminder that there's a better way, a more fulfilling way to live. And it all starts with understanding the transformative power of the gospel, and allowing that to fuel our actions and our interactions with others.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored Paul's reasons for surrendering his rights, his adaptability, and reaching these diverse groups, and this call to disciplined living. We've even touched on, like, the challenges of staying focused in our modern world.
Right.
But there's one, like, crucial aspect of this passage that we haven't fully addressed yet, and that's Paul's motivation.
That's right.
Like, what drives him?
Yeah.
What fuels his passion, his commitment?
Yeah, we've kind of danced around it,
yeah.
But we haven't explicitly addressed, like, the source of Paul's seemingly endless energy and dedication.
Yeah. What compels him to endure hardship? Like, why does he pour himself out for other people? It's clear that he's not doing this for personal gain or recognition.
Right.
So what is at the heart of this unwavering commitment to spreading the gospel?
Well, let's revisit what Paul himself says,
Okay.
In verse 16, he states, "For though I preach the gospel, I have nothing to glory of. For necessity is laid upon me. Yea, woe is unto me if I preach not the gospel."
Necessity is laid upon me. I mean, that's a powerful phrase.
It is.
It almost sounds like a burden, but at the same time, it's something that he embraces wholeheartedly.
Yeah, that's a keen observation. It's like he's saying, this isn't a choice, it's a calling. This isn't about my own benefit or glory. It's a divine imperative.
Right.
It's a responsibility I can't escape.
Right. And then he goes on to say, woe is unto me if I preach not the gospel. It's like he's saying it would be a curse, it would be a tragedy if he didn't share this message.
You've captured it. Yeah, it's not just duty, it's this deep inner compulsion.
Right.
I mean, he's driven by, this profound understanding of the gospel's power to transform lives, and he feels this urgent need to share it with everyone he encounters.
So it's like he's saying, I've experienced this life-changing power firsthand. And I can't keep it to myself.
Yeah.
I have to share it with the world.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the key to understanding Paul's motivation. It's not about personal gain or recognition.
Right.
It's about this overwhelming love and gratitude
Right.
that he feels for what Christ has done for him, and this desire to see other people experience that same transformation.
And it's contagious,
It is.
isn't it?
It is.
Like his passion and conviction, it just leaps off the page, even all these centuries later.
Oh, you can absolutely feel like the urgency, the weight of responsibility he carries. Right. But you can also sense the joy, the deep satisfaction he finds in serving Christ and sharing his love with other people.
Right, and it's inspiring. And it kind of makes you wonder, what are we passionate about?
Yeah.
What drives us? What are we willing to sacrifice for?
Right.
And those are some pretty big questions.
They are.
Yeah.
But I think they're worth wrestling with.
Absolutely, yeah. I think Paul's example challenges us to examine our own hearts, our own motivations. Are we living for something bigger than ourselves?
Right.
Are we willing to step outside of our comfort zones and make sacrifices for the sake of others?
Yeah, I mean, these are questions that resonate deeply.
They do.
Especially in our current world.
Yeah.
Which can feel so self-centered and divided.
You can. Yeah, Paul's message is a powerful reminder that there's a better way. There's a more fulfilling way to live. There is.
Yeah.
And it all starts with, understanding that transformative power of the gospel and allowing that to fuel our actions, our interactions with other people.
Absolutely.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive already, and yet I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
I know.
There's still so much to explore
in
this passage.
It's incredibly rich.
It is. Well, why don't we keep digging then?
Let's do it.
Stay with us, because we're about to uncover another layer of meaning in Paul's message that I think might surprise you.
Okay.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of 1 Corinthians 9, where Paul really lays out this radical approach to ministry, surrendering his rights, adapting to reach all these different groups, and then living with this just unwavering commitment fueled by the transformative power of the gospel. And it's been quite a journey so far.
It really has, yeah.
Yeah.
We've uncovered so much about, his character, his motivations, his strategic brilliance. But there's one more layer I think is worth exploring. It's almost like a hidden message, within the message, this subtle undercurrent that runs through this whole passage.
Ooh, that sounds interesting. Tell me more. What's this hidden message you're seeing?
Well, it's about, it's about more than just his actions and decisions, It's about a way of life, a way of interacting with the world that transcends, the specific issues he's addressing in this letter.
So it's bigger than just the debate over financial support or adapting to different cultures.
Exactly. Yeah, he's modeling a way of being, a way of approaching relationships and challenges that goes beyond the surface level.
Okay.
He's demonstrating what it means to live in true humility, to put the needs of others before your own desires and ambitions.
So it's almost like he's turning the world's value system upside down, In a culture that's obsessed with power, status, self-promotion. He's saying true greatness is found in serving other people. It's in giving, not in taking.
You've got it. He's challenging us to rethink our own definitions of success. What if instead of, striving for recognition and advancement, we focus on making a difference in the lives of the people around us, What if we surrendered our rights in order to build bridges, to create understanding, to demonstrate the love of Christ in tangible ways?
Those are powerful questions. It's almost like he's inviting us to participate in this grand experiment.
Yeah.
This experiment in living differently, in prioritizing love and service over self-interest.
It's not about grand gestures or heroic acts, It's about those everyday choices we make.
Right.
The small acts of kindness and consideration that can have a ripple effect on those around us. It's about choosing to listen instead of talking, to forgive instead of holding grudges, to extend grace even when it's not deserved.
It's about choosing to love, even when it's difficult, even when it's inconvenient, even when it means sacrificing our own comfort or our own pride.
Beautifully put, yeah. That's the essence of his message. It's a message that transcends time and culture. It's a message that speaks to the deepest longings of the human heart.
And it's a message that feels so desperately needed in our world today.
Yeah.
We're surrounded by messages that tell us to look out for number one.
Right.
To prioritize our own happiness and success above all else. But Paul's example,
Yeah.
it reminds us that there's a different path, a
Hmm.
path that leads to, true fulfillment
Right.
and lasting joy.
It's a path that's not always easy, but it's a path that's worth taking.
Yeah.
It's a path that leads to freedom, to purpose, to a life that's truly meaningful, and impactful.
And it all starts with this simple choice,
Mm.
a choice to surrender our own ambitions, our own desires, to embrace humility and compassion, and to live each day with the intention of making a difference in the lives of the people around us.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this challenge. What rights are you holding on to that might be hindering your ability to connect with other people, to share the love of Christ, to make a real difference in the world? What are you willing to surrender, to embrace this radical way of life that Paul modeled for us?
That's a powerful challenge, and I think one that we all need to take to heart. We've been given so much.
Hmm.
It's time for us to give back. It's time for us to live out the gospel in a way that's authentic, compelling,
Yeah.
and transformative.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into 1 Corinthians 9. It's been a privilege to explore these profound truths with you.
It really has. It's been an incredible journey, and we hope you've been inspired and challenged by Paul's message. And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep diving deep, keep seeking truth, and keep sharing the love of Christ with the world. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.